Hello friends, and welcome to Figure Study, where it's time. I've had the Magic Square Stunticon team for a while. I got it in, I forget exactly when, but it was a while back in 2021. I've been wanting to talk about it, but I haven't, mostly because, as I've said in the past, I don't really like looking at combiner teams as separate individuals, if I can avoid it, because it just seems silly to break it up like that. So I prefer to try and cover everything all at once, but the problem with that is it's at least 5 robots that have vehicle modes, robot modes, and their own accessories. There's like transformations to cover, the articulation, the detailing, all that stuff. Then there's the combined mode itself, and it's a lot of work, and nobody cares but me. On top of that, the Magic Square set in particular comes with a lot of extra parts that you can swap in and out, so you have a lot of control over what the combined mode looks like. And that's just a lot to go over. But I took the team off the shelf the other day just to mess around with it, and it's really, really good. So I figured, what the heck, while I'm thinking about it now and I'm still really excited about it, I'm going to talk about it. So we have Pillage playing the part of Dragstrip, Beatback as Breakdown, Collide as Wildrider, Contain as Dead End, and Overlord, yes, Overlord, as Motormaster. Now, for the rest of the video, I am probably going to be referring to them as their official Stunticon names and not the third-party names that they were given, because I actually remember those names better, which is saying a lot for me, because I, up until recently, didn't remember any of the Stunticon names aside from Motormaster, and Breakdown because Transformers Prime. Looking at these all together, they are a very nice set of little cars. A bit bigger than Matchbox or Hot Wheels cars, but they're pretty tiny. The amount of detailing and care that went into the colors and stuff on all this stuff is really impressive. I feel like they all look the part. I mean, I'm not a slavish G1 person, so I don't know how accurate all this is compared to the source material, but everything looks, to my eye, like it's supposed to. Motormaster is incredibly Motormastery. Dragstrip, very Dragstrip. Breakdown and Wildrider definitely look the part. Dead End, absolutely. And they just look really good. They're really solid, nice vehicles. And they all roll surprisingly well, too, with the exception of Wildrider. Wildrider or Collide does roll, but it's kind of just stops after a point. Kind of skids to a stop because it just doesn't have decent friction or lack thereof for rolling. Everyone else rolls much better, though. As I say that, I nearly dropped Dragstrip off the desk because he rolls so well. Like, that's how it's supposed to roll, and Wildrider just does not do that. They look really good. They all come with their individual guns, and Motormaster's case has gun and sword. The disappointing thing about the accessories is, from what I've been able to tell, there's no way to store them in vehicle modes. So because they've all been spending most of their lives in combined mode since I've had them, I just keep the guns in a bag. It's not like a big deal or anything like that. I feel like I'd be more bothered by it in a bigger set, because there's, for example, Ocular Max's Bruticus, where everything stores in that mode and everything is self-contained. Really, the only thing that doesn't store is the big Bruticus gun, but like, you put it in his hand. This kit does not do that, and that sucks, but I think I'm more willing to give it a pass here because they're so small. And I mean, really, speaking of size, this is what they all look like next to the standard deluxe squad. And you can see even Motormaster, who is the biggest one of the lot. If you ignore the trailer, they're all so tiny. And I mean that as a compliment. It's just that they're very tiny. Not world's smallest level tiny, but you know, they're legend scale, basically. Case in point, here they are with a few other legend scale figures that I have laying around, so you can kind of see how they stack up there. And here they are with the Duck Tank. And the transformation for all these figures, with basically 2 exceptions, are really interesting and very different. I was really surprised by just how much engineering isn't shared between them. Obviously, Motormaster's not going to be the same as everyone else, but just the fact that between Dragstrip, Dead End, and then Wildrider and Breakdown, the engineering is just so different. And that's really cool. Wildrider and Breakdown are the most similar. The only real difference between the two of them in terms of the engineering is the fact that Wildrider has toes that you flip out. And you do like a waist swivel just for the orientation. Then you've got Dragstrip that does some really interesting stuff with his transformation and borrows some hints from both Wildrider and Breakdown, but does enough different to really stand out. And then Dead End. Dead End's transformation is definitely the most complex of the smaller bots. It's not really complex, but there is just more stuff going on, and there's some really interesting elements to it. I like how the back of the car basically turns inside out to become the legs. That's really cool. And it's definitely different from the sliding gimmick that the other three use. Granted, Dragstrip, the entire leg slides down, whereas Breakdown and Wildrider, the center slides down while the outside kind of flips around and pegs into it, which is a cool trick, but Dead End's transformation in the legs, very interesting. A little bit fiddly just trying to get stuff around that spoiler, but not a big deal. Also, it's worth mentioning that Dead End's transformation can be a bear if you don't know about this one particular joint, which I did not know was there. I found out about this last night, accidentally, while I was messing around with these things. Because I was trying to get the body of the car pegged together, and it just wasn't happening, and then suddenly my hand slipped, and stuff was like, and things were shifting around like crazy. I thought I might have broken something, but no, I didn't break it. But there's actually a hinge in the top portion of Dead End's car mode that allows the entire front section of the car to pull forward. And the reason that's significant is by pulling that forward first, it makes it so much easier to deal with the legs. Trying to unpeg everything and get those legs out around all the constricted parts of that front of the car is kind of annoying. So once I found out you can just move it out of the way, it made transformation so much better, and it's gotten to the point where I don't think Dead End is my favorite of the smaller ones. That distinction goes to Dragstrip, but Dead End is my second favorite, very close behind Dragstrip. I really do like Dead End's transformation, in particular with the legs. Also of note, Dead End is also the fiddliest in the sense that you have to rotate his hands around 180 degrees. You want his fingers facing the outside of the car mode, otherwise things aren't going to line up quite right. And then Motormaster. Motormaster's transformation is just a joy. It does cheat, but most Motormaster toys do that. But it's so cleverly done. It's fun. It's very straightforward. It's complex enough to feel like you're really accomplishing something, but it's also not so complicated that it gets frustrating. And with that done, we are left with a very convincing Stunticon team in robot mode. These guys look great. All the colors feel right, all the designs and details feel right. From what I understand of the toys, aside from Motormaster, they all have a similar, let's say, very soft focus skeleton if you look at their transformation. Dragstrip's nose ends up on his back. Wildrider and Breakdown's noses end up on their backs. Like, just the distribution of parts is vaguely reminiscent of the G1 toys from what I've seen. Again, ignoring Motormaster. And that's really cool. And these figures are just a tiny but very cool set. Transformation is a little bit fiddly in places for some of them just because of the size, but it's totally doable, and it just looks so good when it's done. I will say, though, there's a weird thing where they all seem to have issues with holding their weapons. Like, their hands are just a little bit too tight. I got them in there, as you can see, but there was a lot more effort involved in getting those tiny pegs into the hands than I would have liked. Yeah, the team looks fantastic. The colors all feel right. Once again, my favorites would go Motormaster, Dragstrip, Dead End, Breakdown, Wildrider. And really the only reason Breakdown is number 3 is because he and Wildrider are basically the same figure with ever so slightly different engineering in just a couple of spots. But I really appreciate just how drastically different Dragstrip and Dead End's transformations are. And Motormaster is just amazing. He would be a perfect standalone figure if not for the fact that he also includes this thing and a lot of what you pay for when you get Overlord Motormaster is related to that trailer and the extra accessories. If they sold just Motormaster in cab form, I would say, even if you don't care about Menasor, just get him, because he is great. So once again, going down the list, Dragstrip is great. I love the mostly yellow color scheme with a little bit of this kind of dark yellow / brown in a few key places and a little bit of red. And then that extremely colorful head that just sets everything off. And also the engine stomach. That's just a nice touch. Breakdown is a very G1 Breakdown looking figure, and he's very clean. Like, he's got a little bit of nose on the back, but overall, it's a very clean transformation, especially considering how small this guy is. Wildrider is basically the same thing as Breakdown, except he's a little bit more sparse in the color department because it's pretty much limited to just his torso and upper arms. He does have that very distinct sideways horned head. Yeah, I think just in terms of robot modes, he is also probably my least favorite of the team, mostly because his deco is so bland, which I know is because of the source material. It's not Magic Square's fault, but it's just kind of a bland design that I'm not super fond of. Now, admittedly, Dead End's design is also relatively straightforward and bland, but like he's got much more color breakup. I really like how he's got the back of the car acting as knee pads. And again, there's that transformation that's just fantastic. And Motormaster, it feels weird to say this, but he's just kind of a perfect little Motormaster. It's a very clean looking robot. He's got a lot of articulation, which we'll talk about in a bit. The colors are great. The color breakup is great. He does the proper Motormaster dark central body with lighter arms thing. It's a very clean transformation. He's got practically no kibble. I feel like the only thing that really counts as kibble is this back flap that's for the top of the cab, but it just sits so tight up against the back that it's just his back. It's not even kibble, really, it's just his back. And I think it's really funny how this tiny thing manages to be a cleaner, more, I guess, slick-looking Motormaster than even Fans Toys version, which I understand is unfair because Fans Toys version incorporates the trailer into the robot mode, which I do think is very cool and I think would be necessary for a figure that size. But like I said, I feel like this set can get away with the separate trailer thing because the trailer is much smaller. I think this one looks the best, honestly. It's just so clean and really nicely detailed, and it also has really good articulation. Yeah, looking at them all together as a team, they look fantastic. In terms of articulation, the articulation across the board is great, but the different Limbots share, for the most part, similar articulation points. Dead End and Dragstrip, the two arms, their articulation is pretty much the same, where it's the, in and out movement at the arms. Dragstrips is hindered a little bit more than Dead Ends because of the giant wheels hanging out over his shoulders, but you still get the in and out, you get the 360 movement on the shoulders, 90 degrees of elbow bend, bicep swivels, wrist swivels. Dead End's wrist swivels are a little bit less constricted than Dragstrip's, just because Dragstrip has the big planks on the backs of his hands that are meant for the transformation. They both get waist swivel. They do also have waist tilts, but the waist only tilts in one direction because they're meant to be arms, and these effectively are meant to act as one of the display options for Menasor. You would think that would mean that they each have a waist tilt in a separate direction, but that's not the case. And then they both have the forward-backward, in and out motion on the hips. They've got thigh swivels, they've got 90-degree knees, and they've got ankle tilts. Dead End's ankle tilts, they're very floppy once you kind of move them from their central stock position, but I don't think that's really a problem because he's so small that he doesn't really have any weight for the ankle tilts to throw off, so you don't really have to worry about the loose ankles. I'm just going to leave them as they are because it's fine. You only really notice if you pick them up, so who cares? Wildrider and Breakdown, they have the exact same articulation, with, again, the in and out motion at the arms, 360 at the shoulders, 90-degree elbows, bicep swivels, wrist swivels. They both have waist swivels, forward-backward motion at the hips, outward motion at the hips, thigh swivels, 90-degree knee bends, ankle tilts, and some forward and backward pivot. Wildrider and Breakdown do have ab crunches, but it doesn't work as well on Breakdown as it does with Wildrider because you have to do a waist swivel. Though in this case, the waist swivel actually gives it more of an ab crunch. It's still perfectly fine and doable for both, but you just get a bit more with Wildrider. And then once again, Motormaster is basically the star of the show. The head is on a swivel, so you don't get any real nod or up and down tilt or anything like that, but you can kind of fake looking down if you move the transformation joint a little bit. The shoulders go around 360 degrees, they can go out. Because the shoulders are on ball joints, you get a little bit of butterfly motion, but you can also use the transformation joint as a forward butterfly. You get a elbow that looks like it's 90 degrees, but it's actually much, much better than that. Not 180, but it's a deep elbow bend. There is bicep swivel. Despite how the arm transforms, you do actually get wrist swivel. You also, of course, get a waist swivel, and Motormaster also has an ab crunch. So you can tilt way back if you are into that sort of thing, or you can tilt quite a bit forward, or you can tilt so far forward that his stomach is practically being absorbed into his pelvis. The hips are on ball joints. The front skirt can get out of the way if you need it to, though it's small enough that it's not a big problem, but they can go back quite a ways, forward the full 90, out practically the full 90, but not quite. You get dedicated thigh swivel. You have what initially looks to be a pretty nice single jointed knee, but it's actually a double jointed knee. There is a second joint that's a lot stiffer than the lower joint. But if you use both of those joints in conjunction, you get a really deep knee bend. And then for the feet, you don't get any forward and backward motion. You can't rotate the ankles, but you do get up to 90 degrees of ankle tilt. So yeah, Motormaster continues to be the best one of the team. But all told, and again, because they're so tiny, the articulation is actually really good across the board and really impressive. Okay, now it's time for the combine mode. So we're just going to turn everything back into a car because that's the easiest way to start. And we'll go from there. Now that everyone's back in their vehicle modes, there are a couple of different things you can do depending on how you want to approach the combine mode. I'm going with just what I prefer. Essentially, I want to avoid as much parts forming as possible. So anything that requires extra bits out of the box, I just don't want to do. So this is like the stock, no extra parts Menasor configuration. So first thing you want to do is with Dragstrip and Dead End, you want to separate them at the waist. The way that works is before you turn them back into cars completely, you want to give the waist a 90-degree rotation because there's actually a keyed locking mechanism in there. So when you give it a 90-degree rotation, then you can pull the lower body away from the upper body, and so you're left with the front and back half of a car for both of them. Wildrider and Breakdown just turn back into cars. Motormaster, you want to turn back into his cab mode, and then basically you just want to separate the cab out, rotate the roof section around 180 degrees, and extend what was the ab crunch. And that will allow you to fold the back section of the cab, the part that connects to the trailer, up, and tuck the roof up along the back of that. And so Motormaster's basically just, I don't want to say a cube, but more cube-like than he was before. You're essentially just turning him into a box to sit in the combiner chest cavity. Now, the transformation from trailer mode to the Menasor combine mode skeleton, it's not complicated, really. It looks like it is, but it's pretty straightforward once you know what the motions are. The trailer essentially turns inside out to reveal this big combine mode skeleton, which is really clever. It's just, you do kind of need to practice it a bit because there are a lot of intricate bits that need to go in specific places. Like I said, very straightforward once you get the hang of it, but until you get the hang of it, you might want to keep the instructions handy or check out some other videos that go over how to do it. So now that the Menasor skeleton is ready, we can just start slapping things on. So let's start with the leg bots, and it's a simple matter of line everything up and slap it in place. And that's it for attaching the limbs, or the legs rather. A little bit trickier for Wildrider, but line them up, peg them in, and there you go. And again, this is the default that I'm doing for this. Now for Dragstrip and Dead End, it's a similar thing where you just find the peg holes and the pegs and you peg them on. And because you've already broken them up, you just peg one onto the shoulder and peg the other bit. Again, peg holes and pegs, and peg it onto the forearm, and there you've got a Menasor arm. I do also appreciate the fact that the way that all of these peg in, they peg in differently on each arm. So there's no way you could accidentally peg Dead End or Dragstrip into the wrong spot. Like, there's just no way. The pegs just aren't there from arm to arm. And now here, if we wanted, we could say, we're done. We really could. We don't actually need Motormaster for anything aesthetically with Menasor, but we're going to do this complete. Motormaster just slots in here. The wheels will sit into... It's kind of hard to see, but there are these little divots on the underside here. The wheels just sit in there. So you get them lined up in there, And then there are some pegs on the underside of the head plank that'll peg into the top of Motormaster's cab. So you just bring that down and peg it into place. And that solidifies things in, and unfortunately the rest of Motormaster doesn't actually peg in, it's just kind of flopping there, but the ab crunch joint is tight enough, at least I've made it tight enough, that you don't really have to worry about it flopping too badly. And what we're left with is a pretty darn great looking Menasor. This is really cool, and I completely understand why companies do the trailer turns into the skeleton thing, because being able to have Motormaster turn into all of this in addition to a robot is a tall order that I feel like, realistically speaking, that's not going to work. So this, I think, is a very reasonable way of doing things. And this looks fantastic. This is a great looking Menasor. The sculpting is great, the colors are great, everything attaches just right. And because there are so many variations to the way that Menasor has appeared in the past, both in terms of the cartoon itself and in like comic books and stuff like that, you've got so many options for how you attach this stuff. As previously discussed, you can hook things up with Dragstrip and Dead End to make them actually function as the arms without using the arm itself, though that does require a fair bit of parts forming. There is also a way to use these little flappy things, and then you have just like Dead End and Dragstrip hanging off of them like flaps, which from what I understand is accurate to one of the depictions in the cartoon, though I'd vastly prefer just to slap it on the skeleton thing, because I mean, like I said, want to avoid doing as much parts forming as possible, and taking off the entire arm to swap it out for something else is definitely a bit more parts forming than I'm prepared to do. Also, I'm noticing that I've got a fair bit of paint scratching on Dead End's windshield there, so that sucks. Something to be aware of, I guess. So basically, and again, the arms are designed to slide off, but you can just use that as like a little flap and just keep Dragstrip and Dead End as solid cars and have them hanging off like that. And then you can use these bits as arm fillers to just kind of fill in the arm so it doesn't look as messed up. So like that's essentially what that would look like if you did the arm flap thing, and I don't like that. But if you thought that's everything you can do with this set, oh boy, are you mistaken. You've got more squared off toes that you can use to replace the toes that are already there, and those can actually, from what I understand, be kept on going from transformation to transformation. You can pop the toes that are on there off and move them around to the backs of the feet, and then put the squared off toes on the fronts. And you can rotate the legs around at the knee in order to give Menasor the option of having Breakdown and or Wildrider on the front rather than around on the back of the calf. You can turn these little plank things into shoulder pylons. There's a lot you can adjust on this guy. You can mix and match pieces to your heart's content. The new chest plate, the new thigh pieces, the new waist piece, the new head, that stuff can be kept on for the transformation. The only bits that you do need to address are the toes that go on the backs of the feet now. But as cool as it might be to have all those options, I prefer this just because this requires the least amount of extra parts. I don't have to keep extra toes off to the side, I don't have to keep these little planks off to the side, I can just go back and forth between the modes, and that's it. And taking a quick look at Menasor's head, it's a fine looking head. It's got kind of the classic Menasor weird robot antenna thing going in terms of the overall sculpt. He's got that nice silver face with the red eyes. Everything looks fine, but I do kind of prefer the alternate head, the I think IDW head, which is a little bit more angular, has the vents on the side, has a little bit more sharp angles to it. But the problem with the IDW head is the face looks so pinched. I wish there was a way to put the G1, let's say, Menasor face into the IDW head, but you just can't. The G1 face is noticeably wider than the IDW face. I did try to switch them a couple of times in the past and it just does not work, and that sucks. I can't say that it's necessarily a missed opportunity, I just wish that the face didn't look so pinched in the IDW version. In terms of articulation, the combined mode has a ball-jointed head, so you do get some okay up and down tilts and, of course, 360 degrees of rotation. The shoulders do rotate all the way around. They also go out almost 90 degrees. It's you'd think that Dragstrip in particular would get in the way, but no, it comes just shy of bonking into the head if the head is facing straight. You get a bicep swivel just above the elbow. You get basically 90 degrees of elbow bend, maybe slightly under depending. In this particular configuration, the upper bits of the robots for Dragstrip and Dead End, in particular Dead End's hands, can get in the way of the bicep swivel and the elbow movement in certain positions. You have full rotation on the wrists. They can't move in and out. They could move out in theory as part of the transformation, but you've got car chunks blocking it, so that's not going to happen. You have very articulated fingers with the ball joint at the base of the thumb and then a hinge, and then all of the fingers have 2 joints each at the knuckle and then the mid-knuckle, so pretty darn good articulation on the hands. You get a waist swivel, but then in addition to that, you get an ab crunch, and it's a really good ab crunch. It's like a 90-degree ab crunch on the combined mode. That's wild. The side skirts can move up and out of the way a bit. They are a little bit restricted, but they can get out of the way for the outward motion. So the outward motion can end up going pretty much 90 degrees. For forward and backward motion, you probably want to move the little flap on the side skirt out of the way because it does curl around, so you'll move that out of the way. And the front skirt, despite the way that it transforms, can rotate forward to get out of the way of the forward motion. So you can get almost 90 degrees forward, pretty much 90 degrees back. There is a thigh swivel. There's also a swivel just below the knee. You also get 90 degrees of knee bend. The feet can kind of wiggle forward and backward a bit, but you do get quite a bit of ankle tilt because of the armature there, and you can ankle tilt outwards too if you wanted to. And that also means that you get that same level of ankle rocker if you've got the shins spun around. So all told, there is quite a bit of articulation in the combined mode, but there's one last thing we've got to go over with the combined mode, and that is the weapons. So it comes with a all-purple, semi-hollow looking, but at least it's like carved detail hollowness rifle, which can peg into the hand like most of these weapons do. And his big, fancy-looking Menasor sword that also has a bunch of shapes carved into the blade and the hilt and all that. And also with a tab that can also tab into the palms. It can be a little tricky getting the weapons into the hands because there's this weird shape on the inside of the palm where you've basically got 2 big divots where it looks like the tabs are supposed to plug in, but there's actually this little spot between the 2 divots where there's basically the spot where these things are supposed to friction in place. So the way that I find works best is to get the weapon into the palm and then slide it down so that the tab ends up sliding into that little narrow spot between the 2 voids in the palm. And that should keep the weapons in the hands fairly solidly. And we're left with a pretty spectacular looking Menasor. This guy is so neat. He's very poseable, but I also like the fact that he's, all things considered, relatively small for a combiner. Like, he's not a small figure when he's combined, but it's a combiner that I can actually fit on my shelf with no problem. I appreciate that very much. Now, in terms of how Menasor stacks up to a bunch of other figures, here he's with the standard deluxe squad, and yeah, as a combiner he is much bigger than a deluxe, but he's also a combiner, so stands to reason. Here he is with Masterpiece Soundwave, so you can get an idea of about where he stands in terms of general ballpark MP10 scale. Basically, you've got a Menasor, a fully combining Menasor Stunticon team that leaves you with a combined mode that's about MP10 height. So after almost 2 hours of recording, that is it. That has been my look at the Magic Square Stunticon team. Again, don't remember the names of everyone, said it at the beginning. It's not important. We all know who this is supposed to be. And this is a fantastic set. I absolutely could have done without all the extra parts if that brought the cost down, because I have no interest in using the extra parts because I just am fine with this version of Menasor and I don't want to deal with any more parts forming than is necessary because I just like having all of the stuff that I need for the various modes in one spot. But I do extremely appreciate the fact that there are so many options, because I know there are going to be people who would see the set and be like, oh, it's cool, but I wish that you could put the arms together this way or that way. That's what's so cool about it, is you can, if you want to configure this guy a certain way because that's how you prefer Menasor to look, you can do that. And I do like that most of the options you get, you can keep attached when you go back and forth between the trailer and the combined mode. Like the alternate pelvis, the alternate thigh plates, the alternate chest piece, all that stuff can stay attached. It's just the other extraneous bits that you have to parts form that I'm just not super into, you know? It looks great in combined mode, but it also looks great as the individual bots, so it's just difficult to decide which way to go with it. Realistically speaking, I know I could probably just do the individual bots and have the trailer as a naked Menasor, but I think it's kind of a good problem to have where so many of the different modes are so good and so much fun to mess with that it gives me a difficult choice of like which one I want to stick with. But anyway, that is going to do it for all of this. I think I've talked more than long enough. So what do you all think of the Magic Square Menasor set? Or there's that oversized, slightly oversized knockoff version that's kicking around. Whatever your thoughts, feel free to chime in down below. I always enjoy hearing from you all. If you like this video or any of the other videos I've done and you want to support the channel outside of watching videos in the first place, I do have a Patreon. It's a single $1 tier that gets you early access to new videos, access to the occasional behind-the-scenes posts that I might make, and sometimes like previews of customs I'm working on, that kind of thing. And I'm hoping to eventually, when I get enough people, start putting up polls so patrons will actually be able to have a say in potential future channel stuff. With all that out of the way, thank you everybody for watching, and remember, art is more than meets the eye.